Like their counterparts in the automotive field, the manufacturers are constantly striving to perfect race-proven innovations in outboard propulsion. But what about the drivers? What motivates them? Some of them, like the orange-helmeted Team Mercury drivers, have already become legends in racing circles. Bill Seebold of St. Louis, Missouri. More than 44 records in worldwide competition. Earl Bentz, Nashville, Tennessee, the youngest member of the team. His first year out as a driver, Earl won 16 races in a row, including the big St. Louis Grand Prix. And Reggie Fountain, Greenville, North Carolina, two-time world champion. These men all have one thing in common. Regardless of the obstacles, they go flat out to win.
Well, Billy, what do you think about this kid I drug up out of South Carolina to come join us on the team?
Well, Earl had a lot of experience. I knew he was going to do good. So he was a new kid on the team, and unfortunately he moved to Oshkosh and had to go back to South Carolina, but he got some good race equipment and went down there and made himself known even more. And then when we got to go to Europe and race, he came over and raced with you, and maybe he should have gotten the boat first, I don't know.
Made more laps, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't unfortunate for me to leave Oshkosh. I mean, to move back south, because it was so cold up there, and we'd go snowmobiling, which was a lot of fun. But I said, if I ever get my rear end back south of the Mason-Dixon line, I'm never going north of Bowling Green, Kentucky again, and I haven't. But it was a great break and a great opportunity for me, and having the opportunity to travel the world with you two guys and Jim Shunke and Garbrick and all the great guys that we had on the team, Les Cahoon and others. It took me to places and parts of the world that I'd never have the opportunity to see without being part of the Mercury racing team. And I think that what we learned on the race course to Mercury applied to production engines on the production line, because we were running V6s long before they were prevalent in the marketplace.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that V6 was the best engine they ever come out with, really. I mean, it's so much more reliable than the inline sixes, and I mean, it just was a winner right out of the box.
A lot of horsepower, and I remember before the Black Max, the first V6 was introduced, one of the times we were up testing in Oshkosh, I walked over with Dick Snyder and Hetzel and the guys at the plant next door to 38 where we were there on the river. And they were running those V6s on those great big center console boats, 20 and 25-foot boats. And I said, you better be putting one of these on a bass boat because that's who your customer's going to be. And they said, oh no, its engine's way too big and too heavy for a bass boat. But if you want to run one, bring one up. So I brought a 17-foot Hypersport up there, and we bolted the V6 Mercury on the back of the bass boat and ran it and tested it and got it set up pretty well. And but they never believed that that great big hulking engine was going to be sold on the back of a bass boat. And lo and behold, after the first year that it was introduced to the public, 80% of the V6 sales were sold on bass boats.
Bass boats, yeah.
Earl, I think you probably built more bass boats with those big engines than anybody else, didn't you? At Stratus and Triton.
We built a bunch of them. We sure did.
Earl took advantage of those big V8s, put them on there, and all his guys were running up and down the waterway, outrunning everybody.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that was the lifeblood of the outboard. At that time was the bass boat industry. It sure turned it around.
Well, all of them, they boat raced to the spot to fish and boat race back home. So performance was very important to the bass market. It still is today.
Oh yeah. It's still a race in the morning when they turn those flights loose. First guy to his favorite fishing hole and fish all day and leave back just in time to get there for weigh-in.
Well, and part of the fun, when I quit boat racing in '81, I started fishing 35 fishing tournaments a year. And there'd be 50 to 300 boats in the tournament. And I'd always get upset when I had a very early start number, like number 1, 2, or 3, because I didn't have any boats to pass. So I'd try to get them to slip me back number 30 or 40 so I could pass a few boats before the blast off. But that was really part of the fun, was racing down the lake and passing all those guys. So
Yeah.
never get boat racing out of your system.
A friend of mine runs Big Bass Bash, and he had over 1,500 boats in his tournament 2 weeks ago down at Lake the Ozarks.
Wow.
It's a big deal.
I think maybe I should have gotten the bass boat business with Earl rather than the high performance offshore business. He sold more boats than we did by a long shot.
Well, I think he hit it on the head a while ago when he said tooling versus the end result in sales was way better on the bass boat industry because you had less tooling. You didn't have to worry about windshields. You didn't have to worry about a lot of stuff in the bass boat industry. And hang a motor on and sell it.
Cost of the entry was a lot lower than what you did, Reggie.
That's right.
We kind of got started on shoestring and sell to the masses.
Well, by the time we all learned what we learned from Garbrick to be prepared, you were prepared when you started fixing those bass boats up. Earl was building them, each one to go out and win one of our races. And it sold a lot of boats for you. You did good. I was proud of you.
A lot of boats. We had a good team too. I mean, it's like the team we built in the bass market was very much like what we had at Mercury Racing. You know, we had people who were dedicated, committed to win. And if they weren't committed to win, and in fact, Alan Stinson, Rourke Summerfoot, a lot of my old racing buddies worked with me in engineering and product development, and they knew what it took to win, the sacrifices and the effort that it took, just like when we were on the race course too. So,
Well, I remember when I was building these boats to begin with, just sports boats to begin with. I remember David Jones came to me and said, you know, we need to get some Mercuries out in saltwater fishing. This was in about 87, 88. And he said, what do we have to do that? So we started thinking about it and found me some good fishermen. They told me about half a dozen things Mercury needed to do to get their fishing boats working, or the motors, so that the fishermen would put them on there. So I told David Jones what to do, that fishermen had told me to do. Of course, you had the advantage, you had already known to tell them what to do. I had to go ask somebody. I told David Jones, he made all the corrections, and I said, well, now we got to get some boats to put them on. So David said, well, I'll buy all the Yamahas off their boats or whatever else they had on them. We'll put Mercury's on, and he did. And that's how we started the teams in fishing, and it worked. Mercury built a real big presence in their racing over the years after they made the necessary changes and be prepared to build the right kind of engines that these fishermen want, because they weren't going to buy them if it didn't suit them. So that goes back to our racing days again. Know what you need to do and be prepared.
well, in the Southern Kingfish Association, the SKA, your boats were predominant in that circuit. And it was a spinoff, really, of the bass tournaments. You know, the same concept. You leave at a certain time, you have to be back in by a certain time. And speed was very important to whether you succeeded or didn't succeed.
Well, Earl, we built our boats like you built yours. You had pads on them, setback transom, all the same things. The only difference in my boats and yours, mine were a little bigger than yours, and you sold a lot more of them.
Well, there was a difference now. You were the only center console builder that didn't own a fishing rod.
That's true. I relied on all my fishermen. You were able to rely on your own
You had the
experience.
Clayton Kirby's of the world, that some of the best king fishermen out there, but you just like to go fast. And
I did.
Fish too.
You know, I had somebody talk about going fast one time, said, how do you ever expect to win a race on a racing team that has Billy Seebold and Earl Bentz on it? And I said, well, Garbrick's going to take care of that for me. I'll get to win my share of the races. I was on there with the legend, Billy Seebold, won more races than anybody on the planet, and the hottest young race kid in the country with you, so I figured I had to behave myself and make sure that Garbrick didn't forget me when it came time to win a race. So I was able to slip in a few little wins along the way with you two guys.
Yeah, you did. I mean, and that's one thing about Gary, though. We had a three-man team, and I think all of our equipment was equal. It was good.
It was.
As good as money could buy at the time.
From a safety perspective, too, Mercury gave us the money that we needed to be as safe as we could, going as fast as we were with the technology that was available at the time. And Gary Garbrick put the money in the right place to help us have the best equipment, best boats. Billy and his team built great boats for us in St. Louis, and you know, we had back in those days, a $2 or $3 million a year budget was pretty big back then for a little old boat race team.
And we can thank Charles Alexander and Jack Riker for that,
We
because
sure can.
they wanted to go fast and win races, and they
Yeah.
dumped all the money in there that we needed to have, and Garbrick was committed to win, and he spared no money in making sure we had the best equipment in the world, which paid off for all the customers out there, because they were buying that same stuff we were developing and winning those races with.
Well, that performance image still holds today for Mercury. I mean, it's, you know, we went several years and didn't lose a race, and you talk to any consumer today from 20 to 60 years old and ask them what's the fastest outboard out there, and they're going to tell you it's a Mercury.
Yeah.
That's right. You sold tens of thousands of fast boats of those things in there.
We have.
So when I tell my story about you know, the dream every American guy has to go from the bottom to the top, I always use you as an example. I found you down there with your Uncle D.F. Jinks, turning wrenches as a mechanic in his a boat repair shop, running a boat called the Wild Geechee. I remember I went back up and told Garbrick and Merton, I said, better go get this guy. He's best there is out there. And so when you came on, I thought we had a pretty good team, because I know the two of you guys, you were going to always win the race if you had a chance to win it. And that I thought I'd get lucky every now and then and win one myself.
And you did. You did. But Earl touched on safety, and Gary was big on safety. In tunnel boat racing, he was big on safety, but a lot of things that came out of that went into the marine industry, like the safety kill switch, which is something that's on every boat now. And Gary, we innovated that at Mercury Racing, and breakaway steering and then that led into building boats with safety cells. And I mean, now a lot of these big offshore pleasure boats have safety pods in them where the people are sitting in there. And I mean, it's just, a lot of it just went right over into the production stuff.
You know, Garbrick was a great engineer too, because he took that German background he had and worked with all the engineers he had at Mercury. He had a real team there, and he was always trying to make that product better and safer, and he did it, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do. It won races for us, and then it served the buying consumers well that bought those products that we raced every day.
And it was nice to have the support of the Mercury production end as well, because we weren't just out there by themselves. I remember Ham Hamburger was a huge proponent of powerboat racing, and you know, we'd go to the Mercury dealer meetings with a two-seater and take dealers for a ride, and you know, it was a great thrill for them and a great privilege for us to be around 4,000 or 5,000 of the best outboard dealers in America.
And that didn't hurt you at all in starting up Triton and
Didn't hurt at all.
and Stratus boats, did it?
Didn't hurt at all. It was a big door opener for me, and for you as well.
Oh yeah, it had everything to do with the success we had at Fountain, and I think it played right into your hands with what you were doing. And of course, Billy, he's been winning races since the day he was born till the day he retired a couple of years ago. So he's probably the winningest race boat driver on the planet.
By far.
But it was always, when you got somebody in that two-seater and you took them out though and made a turn and they pulled 4 or 5 G's in the corner, it really gets your attention and it really makes them respect the equipment. I mean, those tunnel boats are pretty amazing piece of equipment, really.
Gary was kind enough to let me take one to a Hydrosport dealer meeting, and I probably shouldn't tell this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. We had a dealer from down Alabama who had had a beer or two more than he should have. I didn't know it at the time because I'd already taken about 70 or 80 dealers for a ride, and he got in, and it was a boat that had the canted sponsons that hooked. When it would turn pretty darn hard. And we were on Old Hickory Lake, and it run, 100 with 2 people in it. And what I would do is I showed them where the handles were, and this is before the day of 5-point harnesses and stuff, so you had to hold yourself down in that cockpit. And I'll never forget, his name was Jerry Hendricks, And we were right in front of Johnny Cash's house on Old Hickory Lake, and I told him, I said, now I'm going to do this when I go to turn, so you be sure you holding on, because this wasn't anything you could do from a driver perspective. When you turn the wheel, that thing turned. Well, I didn't know that when he got in the boat that he didn't fasten his helmet strap. Well, when I went to do this, he had both hands trying to hold his helmet on his head to keep it from blowing off. Well, when I dove into the corner, I heard a crash, and I looked over my right shoulder, and he'd gone through the side of the boat, and he hit the water like a flat rock and was skipping along. So I thought I killed the guy. I said, oh, got him. I'm one of Mercury's drivers. I'm working for Hydrosport, and now I've killed one of our best dealers. And I turned around and went over to him, and he'd lost his glasses, his billfold was floating over here, his shoes over there, and his helmet, of course, had come off his head. And fortunately, he had a life jacket on, and but I didn't know that he'd been in the sauce pretty good, so he really didn't feel a thing. And the first words out of his mouth is, "Hot dog, what a ride." And I had to call Garbrick and tell him what I'd done, and he said, "Oh, God, is the guy going to sue us?" I said, "No, he's a good guy." So when I still see him at boat shows today, Jerry gives me a little grief about that trip. But it was a lot of fun.
That wasn't the first person that got thrown out of those two in line tandem, without seatbelts. So I threw a newspaper reporter out of one in Huntington, West Virginia. And the next day in the newspaper, and same thing. I thought I killed the guy. Man, he's coughing up water, and he was a pretty good sized boy, and I'm trying to pull him up on the deck, and he goes, "Oh God, I lost my wallet." Oh yeah. Next day, headline in the newspaper was "Taking the Plunge with Seebold." So.
Well, it was a great marketing tool.
Oh.
And and I had a reporter one time that we were in Ashland, Kentucky. Had that thing up there, and a reporter got in one time, and he asked me. He said, "Now, Earl," he said, "is 100 miles an hour faster on water than it is on land?" And I thought he was kidding, And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, "This guy's serious," I said, "Oh yeah." I said, 100 miles an hour on water is at least 40 or 50 miles an hour faster than it is on land. He said, "I thought it was." Little Red looked like a surfboard with a big motor on the back.
That's exactly what it looked like. That's what it was too. It was only about that deep.
They put you back in that boat because that reminded you of hydro days, didn't it?
I think they thought I was the dumbest of the three of us. I ran it in several races, set some records with it.
Carl Stippich built that boat.
Yeah.
I got to run in the bigger version of it. It was fast too, not quite as fast as that little one they put you in, but I could get over a little more water with it.
But that Twister Craft was a good boat, and we set a record with it in Lake Maggiore, Florida. We set another record with it in Miami, and then that was with inline sixes on it, those records. Then we decided, and the boat was built for an inline six. Then we decided we were going to put a V6 on it. And we put a V6 on it, and we took it and raced it at St. Louis. And it was fast.
Surfboard with 400 horsepower on the back end.
Yeah, that's about it.
That was another attempt by Garbrick to push the performance level of our boats up, and then after he went through that, I remember he got you building boats, and from that point on, it was Seebold boats I was always crawling into.
We had a good one on that first one. The first team boat we built went to Havasu, and Case Vanderbilt and myself were driving it, and we won the race. And then you and Earl ran that same boat at Parker 2 months later, and Gary said, "Let's build another one right away." So that's where it started from.
Great boats, but what I never liked though is you kept building. You'd improve on every one, and then we'd get a boat, then you'd build one for some customers, and they might be a little skosh better than what we had. So now that we're 30 years later, I can tell you that kind of aggravated me a little bit. I thought we should have always had the best stuff rather than giving it to the customers.
My contract read that was okay to do that as long as they had a Mercury on the back.
Well, they all did, I think.
Well, I'll say one thing for him. He didn't keep all the good boats for himself. He handed them out as they came off the line to everybody. Yeah, if he won a race, he gave you that boat, said, "You can have this one. Go build me another one. It's faster."
That's correct.
I think that's why so many guys wanted to buy boats from us, because I always said, "Hey, If you don't think your boat's as good as mine, I'll give you my boat and I'll take yours. I'll sell you as good a boat, because I always felt like I was a good enough driver to go out and win on my driving ability, not having an advantage on a boat. So I didn't mind doing that. So.
Well, I think that's one reason that you were so successful in selling boats to others, not just to Mercury, but building boats for us. But all the independents out there, they were fast as heck because they had good boats. So what it really came down to, who was going to win the race, is who could set up the best and who kept their foot out the longest.
And that's what it should be. You know, that's what it should be. And at that point, for about 10 years after that, 95% of the boats on the circuit were Seebolds.
Yeah.
And then we just didn't make the transformation from wood boats to composite boats as quickly as we should have.
Composite boats came along after I retired from racing. So that was a little different era for me. But what I liked about the wood boats is we had the flexibility to change things. If you wanted to change the lift a quarter or a half an inch, or the degree of angle on the back of a sponson, or the hydraulic twist in the sponson, or the beveled edges on the inside of the sponsons, and all the different little tricks and things that were done over the years that we learned a lot of through trial and error. Wood gave you a lot of flexibility too.
Oh, it did. It did. Until I think the best boats we ever built were the composite midsection, safety cell, carbon fiber tray back to the engine, and then wood tunnels and wood sponsons. Because you're right, you can, and that was always part of our deal. Is, you know, if I had a driver that called me that weighed 225 pounds, I could build his boat with a little more lift and a little wider tunnel, and then if I had a guy that weighed 135 pounds, and we had that kind of variation, and back in those days, there was no weights on the boats until we finally started putting a weight on the whole rig, made it a little more competitive for everybody.
Same thing actually occurred with the V-bottoms I was building, the big boats. We went to the composites and laid them up light. You make them light and they go a lot faster. Doesn't take near as much horsepower to make them go.
Yeah, that's true. But when I quit racing in Europe, the last full-time season we had over there was '88. Then we ran over and dabbled a little bit in it and would win a race here and there, but we started losing customers because they moved off the continent and started racing around the world, in the Middle East and China and Singapore and Abu Dhabi. And so when they did that, those boats would spend 2 or 3 months in a container, and they had no place to repair a wood boat. And wood boats are a little more fragile than a composite boat. But if you ever drove a composite boat compared to a wood boat, most of those guys over there have never driven a good wood boat. If you ever gotten one, the first time I ever drove a composite boat, I said, there's something wrong with me. I can't see. My eyes are fluttering because they're so much stiffer. They got better as we lightened them up, and they became a little closer in feel, but they never got the same feel as a wood boat, because a wood has a memory, and it'll take a little bit of the shock of the water and return to its original shape. Where the composite, if you make it light enough to give you that flexible feel, it usually will delaminate or shear. So, I mean, and they've had a lot of that. The wood or the foam coring boats over there, they work good until they get pounded a little and the foam crushes, and then all of a sudden they blow the skin off the outside of them. So they're not the best thing that totally ever happened to racing, but they make it a little more economical for the teams.
Getting back to Gary Garbrick, and because Gary's not with us anymore, Gary and I remained friends up until the time that he passed away leading a golf tournament down in Florida. And I think that all of us owe a great deal of gratitude to Gary for the leadership that he provided, the doors he opened for all of us sitting at this table, and and helping me get an opportunity to drive the best race team in the world, which helped me build on my career through Stratus and ultimately Triton boats, and Reggie with Fountain Power boats, and your when you got out of the cockpit of tunnel boats. And then Billy, of course, you were Mercury's race boat provider for 17 years and built your entire career on racing.
Yeah.
Gary set a good example for all of us to follow, and he was hard driving, dedicated, unique individual.
Well, something I don't think most people know, but Gary Garbrick, our team manager, who ran everything with an iron fist in the racing team we had, which, as you said, 4 years in a row, we never lost a race. Well, Garbrick said to me one day, I want to build some high-performance offshore boats like Darn Arno does. He says, we're going to start a boat company. I said, who's we, Gary? He said, me and you. I said, really? He said, yeah, you're going to go home and start one of these. So that's what we did. We came home and started it as Fountain Garbrick. And that's how Fountain Powerboats ran the first year till Howard Arneson came offered him a huge amount of money to help him develop the Arneson stern drives. And of course, then Gary took that opportunity, which I don't blame him for doing, and went along and helped Howard along and helped him to develop the Arneson stern drive. Then he went from there to OMC and building propellers and came back and worked with me again. But he was a brilliant guy, and there would have never been a Fountain Powerboats if he hadn't have told me we were going to start a high-performance sports boat company. And I was so used to taking orders from the guy on the racing team, I said, well, okay, Gary, we'll do that. So that's how Fountain Powerboats started.
Wow.
Gary had a unique look into the future. He always wanted to try something a little different, and he would see like the stern drive packages when they first started putting them in tunnel boats, and just gear case designs that Bob Hetzel and everybody worked on, which ended up going into production stuff. I mean, Gary was always kind of looking to the future, and that's really what built Mercury High Performance. The products that were a few years ahead of the market.
And what I liked about it too was the cloak of secrecy around everything that he did in Mercury and us and our team. And when the KT World Championships, the inboard stern drive World Championships were coming up in Miami, Gary and Bill Petty, Bill funded the deal in partnership with Mercury, and Bill asked if we wanted to drive this KT boat, which was the 17-foot tunnel boat, little boat with a 600-horse engine, inboard Cosworth in it, 3-liter, naturally aspirated, of course. And we went up and ran it, and the power to weight ratio, the boat weighed about 280 or 90 pounds, and with 600 horsepower in it, and man, you mashed your foot down that thing, you better be holding on, because it was, you were fixed to get laid back in the seat. And we kept it top secret from everybody. We went down, we had it all covered up. Never forget the first time we pulled it in the pits, and all these guys, these big 24 and 25 foot KT boats with these big 454s and great big motors and great big boats, and they'd run 125 miles an hour or so, something like that, and had decent acceleration, but this thing was a missile. And of course we put it down, and we were already set up. Like you said earlier, we didn't need to test. We already knew what we were going to do, and I went out and made about 2 laps and came back and put it on the trailer, and they started protesting right away. And I think first place in that race was $10,000 plus a vacation to Vegas, plus a TV with a VCR deal was a trophy, which I still have, by the way. And I mean, the race hadn't even started and they were already protesting the deal. But that's the kind of vision that Gary had.
Yeah. And
of course, we blew him away in the race, and that was on Sunday. And by Monday, the boat was outlawed for future races. So we won. And but
and
he was always
he didn't mind doing that. That was part of his, look into the future and his experiment, going down and improving on things. And they learned from that. And the Mercruiser stern drive helped the development of that. And I'm sure that was at that time, that was back on a #1 drive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just But Gary had that, you know, and there's been some guys that have that, and you got to hand it to Renato Molinari. Renato had that. He kind of was always looking into the future, and probably because he wanted to build something nobody else had. But that's kind of human nature there, you know. But he was a very competitive guy and a good driver.
He was very competitive.
You know, so he helped OMC for quite a few years with his boats.
Well, and we won a lot of races in Molinari's, and
Oh yeah.
Renato won a lot of races, and you know, they were great boats. It's just when he went to OMC and we started running your boats, you know, we were able to have a lot more input than we did. We didn't have any input with Renato, and
Right.
you know, you sort of ran what he gave you, but a lot more fun the latter half.
Well, it was, you know, we had a close relationship between the drivers, and then there was a close relationship between Mercury and Seebold, because I was only in St. Louis, not in Italy. So it was a lot better communication. And we just, like I said, I've said this before, I mean, Gary used to say and tell us all, if you can think of any one thing on a boat, motor, propeller, whatever, that'll make it go a half a second a lap faster, let's try it. Let's do it. If it don't work, we'll put it back like it is. But Gary never stopped you from trying to go faster. That was his ultimate goal, and be safer.
You remember when we'd be testing out on Butamore, and the OMC guys would be up there with the binoculars in that little park trying to snoop on us and see what we were doing? Wasn't that fun?
Oh yeah.
Gary used to love to psych them out, man.
I got a funny story about testing on Butamore. And I probably did more testing on Butamore than anybody did. And they were having a dealer congress at the Pioneer. So we had something, we were getting ready to go some race. I forget what we was at and what we were doing, but I was up there testing. So we went out. It was windy the day before, couldn't get a lot done. You know, at Butamore, you had to run. You'd be out there at 7 in the morning or 6:30 in the morning, you'd be on the water. The wind would come up at 8 or 9, and you're off the water till almost sunset. So we're out there, and I get in the boat, and I go out. We left the race course in. Shunky and Dave Byer, and I think, I forget who else was in the boat, the rescue boat with them. So they're getting arrested. I get in the boat and I take off up the river, and you don't run fast in the river because everybody blew over in that river from the wind between the buildings. So we get out to Butamore. They're not out there yet. They're still coming up the river in the rescue boat. I go out there and I go, I'll just go out and make a few laps. Yeah, boom. They get out there, and I'm sitting on the bottom of the boat. This was before safety cells. So here we go. They hook on the boat, they tow it back in, get back in there and get it rolled over. And it had a new style cowling or something. We lost a rear cowl. So we're back out there in a couple hours, you know, and here comes Alexander and Reichert and 2 or 3 other people. We're out there with boat hooks.
Trying to find the cow.
Trying to find the cowling. They come on, what are you guys doing? Oh, well, Billy had a problem out here. He barrel rolled the boat and lost the rear cowl. We're trying to find it. We don't have another one like it. Okay, have a good day. They're gone. Later that day, we had made the first 2-seater. We made it out of a Molinari. So, I think it was a Molinari. Yeah, it was. So, we get it in the water, and BB was in Oshkosh with me, and him and Jack Ferris were working on the 2-seater and got all ready to go. So we dump it in the water, and I said, okay, BB, get in there. You'll be my first passenger. Went out to Butamore Bay and made 2 or 3 laps around the race course. He said, take me in right now. Where they do that. So I said, okay, I got to go over to Pioneer with a name. I want to just give some of the dealers a ride. So we get over there. And of course, Garbrick's at the Pioneer waiting for me to show up with the boat. And I come down the river and I come around the corner and go into Pioneer. And it was one day on Winnebago that you could run a tunnel boat. It wasn't too bad. So I pulled into the dock, and here's Ham standing there talking to Gary. And Gary goes, get out of the front and let Ham drive that. I said, what? Yeah, get out of the front and let Ham Hamburger drive it. Sylvester Hamburger.
Oh my God.
Let Ham drive it. I said, are you kidding? No. get in the back, you can ride with him. So Ham gets in there, and you know how big he was. He squeezes down in there, and here we go. Ham had a ball, he loved it.
He tried to let him drive me around. I said, my mama didn't raise no fool. I said, if you're gonna drive it, you leave me back at the dock. Ham, the same deal, the same on Winnebago.
Yeah,
I wouldn't let him.
Gary had some crazy ideas for media too. We took the two-seater inline, but it had canopies and we were strapped in. And we're gonna give a driving school at Lake X. So we had Wally Poole from Trailer Boat Magazines. He was our first student. We did him one day. And we went out and took a ride the boat and came in, drew out the race course, kind of showed them what they had to do. But Wiley did pretty good because he's had a lot of experience driving high performance boats. There's no problem with him. But the deal was I was going to ride them for 10 laps and then they were going to drive 10 laps. And I was going to ride in the back. I said, the only way I'll do that is if we put the trim switch in the back. Put a switch underneath there, so when they get behind the steering wheel, they can't trim it. I'll trim it. So we did, Wiley did pretty good. So the second guy was from Popular Mechanics, Joe Scarupa.
I remember.
He's 40 years old. He lives in downtown Manhattan. Never had a driver's license in his life. Never even driven a car. Now I'm going to put him in this boat. So we did the same thing. We went out and ran it, and then we went in the classroom and showed him how to enter the corners and everything. And went back out and I drove again and he got in. He was so nervous he didn't know what to do. He'd go about 30 mile an hour, you know, and slow, almost down to a stop for the corners. I said, Joe, you can go ahead and run a little. He finally got up to about 40 or 50 or 60 mile an hour. That's fast he'd ever go.
Well, that's good.
He wrote a great article it was Mechanics Illustrated.
Well, you're braver than me. I wouldn't have done that.
Well, I had to trim. I wasn't worried about anything except the trim.
I'd had the trim and the kill switch cord.
Well, we had a kill switch in the back.
You did.
Yeah.
The car Kike days helped to establish Mercury as a performance brand. I think that what our race team did was solidify that performance image with Mercury in the minds not only of the dealers worldwide, Mercury dealers worldwide, but with the consumers. And not only that, but there were so many innovations that came as a result of racing that whether they were better gear materials in lower units, better pistons, better rings, better blocks, better fuel injection, things that the castings on center sections, mid sections, because we would put an outboard in an hour through more stress in the 6 hours of Paris, let's say, than the average consumer would put an engine through in a lifetime. And so all of that translated over to a better product for the consumer, the end user. So really there were two benefits, but perhaps the most important was, in my view, was building the brand, building the image of Mercury being the performance outboard. And a lot of those races that we competed in were, you know, Parker used to be 9 hours long. They cut it back to 7, but still, that's a long time to go out and turn 9,000 RPM with an outboard. When a production outboard turns 5,800 to 6,000 RPM or 6,200, we're turning that same engine with plastic reeds rather than metal reeds, 9,000, 9,500, in some cases 10,000. So we would stress that product, put it through more stress in a matter of a few hours than the average consumer would in a lifetime. So the engineers learned a lot from that experience and the branding deal. What do you
Well, I think the structure of the company was different back then than it's probably not any different now, but originally Carl Kiefer wanted to race to improve the product. And that was his whole reason. It was an engineering exercise, not a marketing exercise. And the reason that we all started racing for Mercury is because they love to go to these 9-hour races and 8-hour races and 6-hour races. And they used to say if you won Paris, it changed the sales 10% in Europe the following year. So it was very important for them to go win.
I remember in 1974, I believe it was, it may have been 75, I think it was 74, I ran my first V6 on a red Molinari pickle fork. Remember Garvey called me up in the morning, it was cold. He says, we're gonna go run a new V6 that's gonna be the motor of our future. Now, I believe 1974. So here we are in 2013, which is what, 39, almost 40 years later, and that V6 is still out there running in a highly improved state. So what we were doing 39, 40 years ago with the very first motor has developed over the years, and those motors are still out there being run today, and it's still Mercury's leading two-stroke engine.
Yes.
I know with Fountain Power boats, we first tried to improve the product, and then once we knew we'd improved it to the point we could brag on it, we then started telling everybody about it with the magazines, TV, now today it'd be the internet, of course, at boat races, at fishing tournaments. We'd go out and spend as much money telling people about the successes we had in the boats that we built, and either winning fishing tournaments or winning races. And you could see the direct input of that marketing. The more we marketed, the more demand we created. So without that marketing, to reinforce what we were doing with the testing, first I think you mentioned you got to do the testing. Engineers come up with a good product, then you go out and win some fishing tournaments. You've done that a lot with your bass boats, and we've done that some with the offshore with offshore center consoles, and then we won some races, set a few speed records, and then we spent a lot of money, at least as much as we spent creating those records, out letting people know about it, and that I'm convinced helped us sell a lot of boats, because I think over the 30 plus years we built boats. We started off as the smallest company, of course, when we just built a dozen boats the first year, but we eventually sold over 10,000 boats for just over $1 billion. And over that period of time, we probably spent $150 million of the $1 billion in engineering, racing, and marketing. And people say, well, why'd you do that? Well, I did that because that helped us become the biggest boat company in the world. If we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have been where we were. And you did the same thing. You had those bass boats out in front of everybody. You used every bass tournament as a marketing exercise, showing your boats out in front of everybody. Made those fishermen buy those boats. And the proof is, look how big you got. I mean, you got really big. So without the marketing, the rest of the engineering you've done is not nearly as effective. So I think you got to have the marketing, tell the world about it. I just wish it had been 30 years ago as inexpensive to market as it is today through using the internet, because you reach a lot more people for a lot less money than we were having to do back the way we did it in years past. But I believe there's the direct correlation between the marketing program and the success it sells. Now, a great marketing program, and you know this for sure, Earl, it'll kill a bad product as good as anything in the world, just to kill it quick, because people will go check it out and it doesn't meet expectations and nobody will buy it. But if you create a good product, you got to tell the world about it. If you do that, that's the combination of success. First a good product, then to tell the world about it.
I think the 70s and 80s and 90s were the glory years of racing.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
You know, it probably started in the 60s, but 70s and 80s and 90s were definitely the glory years. Unlike NASCAR, the foreign companies never got into boat racing, and Mercury and OMC kind of overlooked the Japanese coming in, and all of a sudden they had a spot in the market that Mercury and OMC were kind of fighting each other about. And NASCAR's kind of, they've got 3 or 4 manufacturers in there that support the sport. And the outboard manufacturers never really supported the sport much. I mean, yeah, they made an engine and they made it available for sale, and a few guys got to race it for nothing. But I mean, like again, going back to the marketing, the outboard manufacturers never really used it a lot in their marketing programs.
In the later years, the way we did the racing at Fountain, like in a fishing tournament, and in the 2000s, I remember once we went to a SKA tournament down in Key West, and we took a new version of our fast boat with 300 Mercuries on it, and we started behind 200 boats, and we passed them all with a camera to get the pictures of it, and then we turned around and came back behind them and passed them again, and we turned around and passed them again, running circles around them. So we created our own race, and right out there, even closer than having a separate race, it was a tournament itself. And Earl, you did the same thing. I see all those bass boats taking off, and here'd be one of your Stratuses or Tritons up front, leaving everybody. And it wasn't any accident it did that. You and Summerford were tweaking on that thing on the bottom all the time because it's in your DNA.
All the time.
And so every fishing tournament this guy went to, he was in a race. He was a fisherman. He loved to fish. But first thing on his mind was getting there first and letting everybody see him do it. So I think the racing is important today, but it's in a more subtle way. It's at the fishing tournament sites, and then with the sports boats, it's just out on the water where you go out hunting people down, and because the racing isn't as strong today. I remember we used to go to offshore races in the 80s and 90s, and there'd be 100 boats there. And now we thank goodness for SBI, but still the amount of boats out there is a lot less than it was before, just a fraction of what it was before. So the real correlation between the racing and performance and marketing is on-the-job exhibitions, and that means going to the fishing tournaments, and that's really, if you look at it, that's about the biggest venue you can go to and get some exposure. Go to a big bass tournament with all those. How many guys in those bass tournaments? What boats?
Well, the BASS professional tournaments are limited to 100 pros, but some of the other tournaments, the non-sanctioned events, will have 200 to 400 boats in them, and that's 2 fishermen per boat. So, but I think looking at what we did with racing and Mercury utilizing what we did to push the product, the engines, gear cases, propellers, the heat tempering in the gears, and I mean everything that we stressed to the limit. I think that Mercury today is really doing the same thing, not as much through racing that we did, but they're doing it with professional bass fishermen, guides, people who push the product beyond its limits, and monitor that. And I know at the bass tournaments, Mercury has a presence of mechanics and engineering type people at every event, and if something goes wrong, they're there to service those professional fishermen, because there's a lot of money at stake. You know, to win the Bassmaster Classic, first place is $500,000.
Wow.
And I wish that we were racing for 500,000 years ago. But, those men and women that fish tournaments today on the bass side and the saltwater side, there's a lot of money at stake, and they do push them to the limits. And if there is a few stumps they've got to jump to get back to a 10-pound bass, they're gonna jump them. They're gonna get back there. They're not gonna let that stand between them and that $500,000. So they push the product to the limit, and whether it's propellers, gears in the gear case, or pistons, rings, fuel injection systems, water pumps, you name it. Shallow water, deep water, sand, gravel, mud. So they're still learning, but they're getting product back in from the people who fish 300 days a year and do the same thing that we did in probably a shorter period of time, but they're doing it with these guides and professional fishermen, both in salt and freshwater, bass and walleye, and kingfish circuit and so on.
I think the leading example that I know of today And it's been this way for probably the last 10 years or more, maybe even longer than that, is high performance products at Mercury. They're developing a faster, better product, and then they're getting it out in the right hands and sending it out to people that are in effect marketing for Mercury by going out and being the first one to a fishing spot, which is important to the fishermen, or they've got this now 1,650 horsepower V8 engines that they'll put in a few key boats who goes to poker runs and smokes everybody out there because they got this high-powered engine. And that's about the only form of engineering and marketing progress that you really see with the outboards. It doesn't have anything to do with performance. And about the only outboard company I know that's doing it's Mercury, and that's with high-performance products. So they're doing a good job, I think, of making sure that Mercury's products are tweaked out and put into the right atmosphere or into the right location to show off Mercury's performance edge, which I think then bleeds over to all the other motors that they're selling throughout the entire industry, whether it's bass boats. They got bass boat engines that are just like, almost like the race engines we have. They selling them to some of these guys buying your boats and got them out promoting for them. So I think that's about what's really left out there that's really high profile and doing a good job. And I think that high performance products is a great example of that. Well, I'd like to say that I consider myself extremely fortunate to have been part of one of the most successful race teams ever, led by one of the best directors of a racing team ever, and Gary Garbrecht, and two great friends and teammates, Billy Seebold, Earl Bentz.
Yeah, I feel the same way.